In these ancient times, he was a man who was better fed than anyone else who lived in that place. For it was unusual for anyone to have more food than they needed, but it was there about his belly. And he was short, and it wasn't because he'd never done any work. On his father's farm he had worked very hard indeed, but the Romans had come, and they had set up their camps, and soon there was a village of Romans, these people who had come from so far across the sea to conquer them all. He'd never really been into the settlement of Urbs Caluvium. He'd never really been to that place. In fact, once they had come and taken his father's farm from him, he decided that he would not work for them. He lived in a large, damp cave that was far away from all of the other villages that he knew so well, and far away from the Romans. The entrance to his cave was hidden in amongst the oak trees, and it was hard to find, but he had hand-carved a chimney at the back of the cave to make sure that the smoke from his fire and the light from his lamps and tallow candles could not be seen. He knew that many of the people that he had worked alongside, who had worked for his father and then worked for him, they now knew that there was only work with the Romans, but he would never bow down to a foreign power. He knew that they would destroy the farm. He knew that they would take the soul, the heart, from out of the farm that used to be his. And now he pulled his ripped cloak about himself. And it's a terrible thing to say. The reason why he had so much food in his belly was because he stole from those that he saw as traitors. Traitors to the old ways, to the old gods. Those who worked for the Romans, he stole food from them. And he knew that they would be punished by the Romans, but he didn't care. He was a free man and would bow down to no one and nothing. But on one stormy winter's night, when the wind was making the candles flutter and his fire almost gutter out, he could hear that there were soldiers close by. He was frightened. Frightened not just for himself. He was mean, and yes, he stole from people who used to once be his friends, but he was frightened of what the soldiers would do, for he was not alone when he tried to resist the Romans. He had golden rings upon his fingers, bracelets at his wrist, and anklets that he had stolen, as well as stealing food. But he could hear soldiers, and he saw one, taller than all of the rest, and he pulled his ripped cloak about him and peeped outside of his cave. And there he could see that there was a soldier with a piece of parchment in his hand, striding towards the governor of this area. Short of being the emperor, he was in charge of everyone who lived in this place. Curiosity is a terrible thing, and the old man pulled his cloak tighter around him and strode out into the stormy winter's evening and made sure he could not be seen or heard. But when that centurion with a piece of parchment came up to the governor's tent, he came closer to the soldiers than he would ever have wanted to through choice, and he listened to what was being said. The centurion's voice was low and deep and dark as he read out the notice to the governor. The emperor himself has said that you must burn the fields and the farms and the homes of these people and teach them a lesson. The governor lay down and started to pray before a shrine, an altar. He couldn't believe it. He had prayed, but the gods of woods and fields and rivers and the sun. And here was his enemy, bowing down and praying to a stone altar that was chipped and carved with letters that he could not understand. But what he did understand was the fact that for once in his life, he was going to have to try and do something to save those people, as he did not want them to be burned in their homes or their fields destroyed. He ran out. He could see that the soldiers were now getting themselves ready, for they were not going to wait for the dawn's light to come. They were going to set fire to the fields now, in the darkness, as the wind would blow it. And he ran up, and in front of all of the soldiers he stood there and said, "My dear friends, it is so good to see you here upon this night, and I am so glad that you are here in our country to show us the true ways." The soldiers looked at him. They didn't know his face. They did not know which part of the town or village he had come from. But what they did understand was this, that he was pulling golden rings from his fingers, bracelets from off his wrist, necklaces that he had stolen and taken, and he was here, and he was holding them to them, hoping that if he were to bribe these soldiers, then perhaps, just perhaps, the rest of the village would have time. Now, I've got to say, he made such a commotion that some of the villagers did pop their heads outside of their houses, and they were quite surprised to see him, for they knew that things had been going missing, and they suspected that it was him. And as they listened closer, they knew that he would not have done this unless it was for a reason. The old man's words were spiked with messages for those who wished to overhear. Yes, it is very late in the night to set such a fire in these great fields. The villagers understood what it was that he was doing. The soldiers were not going to be stopped, but they would be halted, but just for a moment, by the idea and the prize of gold. Many years later in that place, archaeologists would come. They would dig in the soil, and they could not explain why there was a thin layer of burnt earth in that place. They could not explain it. They did not know the true story. They did not know what had happened in that place. And in amongst all of the burnt earth, they found this: lumps of gold that were melted in a strange and a heavy and a hard heat. For his job was a good one, for he had halted them long enough for the villages to be emptied, for the villagers to get away. But it was no good for himself, for he perished in that place, and all that there was to show for him was a small melted ball of gold.